What can recent election results tell us for the 2026 Senate map? Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I thought it'd be fun to look at the recent election results from 2024 and 2022 and use them to try and predict what the 2026 Senate map will look like. Now obviously this isn't my actual prediction, this is more of just a scenario video, but I thought it'd be interesting still to do. So there's 35 Senate seats up in 2026. And you may be wondering, well, shouldn't there only be 33? Why is there an extra 2? The reason being that Ohio and Florida are both considered special elections due to special elections happening because their former senator, Ohio J.D. Vance, is now the vice president, and in Florida, Marco Rubio is now the Secretary of State, causing there to be 2 extra Senate seats in the special election in this year. But even still, Democrats start out with 34, Republicans start out with 31. There are a handful of states we already know are going to vote for both political parties, and recent election results are a large reason why. In 2024, for instance, the state of Oregon voted for Kamala Harris by 14.3%. We can look at the Senate map as well, just to compare that. In 2022, their Democratic senator won by 14.9%. So barring a complete out of nowhere like left field surprise or something, we can expect Oregon is going to be right around a 15-point Democratic win as Oregon's continued to be around that margin in 2024 and 2022. We could also do something similar for these other states up here, like Montana. It was a very close race in 2024 due to a Democratic incumbent senator, but Montana at the presidential race just voted for Donald Trump by 20 points. Idaho voted for Trump by 36 points. So these states, we know unless something crazy happens or the former Democratic senator runs for this seat, we know Montana and Idaho will be safe Republican. Same things with Wyoming and South Dakota. We know these states are going to go this way. The state of Nebraska gets a little more interesting. The state overall voted for Donald Trump by 20 points, so from that standpoint, we can expect it to be safe. From the Senate side of things, we saw one Senate race where Dan Osborne ran against Deb Fischer, and it ended up being a likely Republican race. Pete Ricketts' special election was a safe Republican win. It all depends on what Dan Osborne decides to do. Until Dan Osborne declares, we're just going to put Nebraska as safe Republican for now, but that could match up a very interesting election where things could get very close. The state of Colorado. In 2024, we saw Donald Trump lose to Kamala Harris in the state by about 11 points. Looking at the last Senate election in the state, 2022, Michael Bennet won, likely Democratic, by 14.6%. Again, Colorado could be right around a safe Democratic win, but we'll just start it for now as likely Democratic. Kansas, right next door, 2024, we saw Donald Trump win the state by 16 points. Oklahoma, we saw it go 34 points for Trump. These 2 Senate races, as a presidential map, these 2 Senate races we know are going to be safe Republican. Now we have another state that actually I'm gonna come back to Texas. Actually, I don't think it's going to be safe. We'll come back to that. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. All of these states fully expect to be safe Republican states. Illinois, it just voted for Kamala Harris by about 11 points. The last Senate election that took place in the state, Tammy Duckworth won by about 15.3%, right around a safe Democratic win. We can expect Illinois will probably go safe. Delaware, we can also expect, as well as Rhode Island and Massachusetts. All these fully expect to go safe. So just looking at the states that voted by over 15 points or right around that number in 2024, this puts the Republicans up at 46, Democrats are at 40. This isn't going off of candidates running per se. This is just based off the election results of 2024, because that's where things start to get very interesting here. Looking at a state like Texas. Texas just voted for Ted Cruz by 8.5% in 2024 on the Senate side of things. Presidential race, Trump just won it by 13.7%, also likely Republican. Those 2 ratings would give Texas a likely Republican ranking. New Mexico. New Mexico just voted for Harris by a likely Democratic margin. The Senate race, also likely Democratic for Martin Heinrich. This would also put New Mexico into the likely Democratic margin. Alaska. Alaska is an interesting state because the last Senate race had 2 Republicans facing off, so technically it ended up being a likely Republican win. The 2021 was a likely Republican win. The presidential race in 2024, also likely Republican. Just based off the election history, that would put Alaska at likely Republican at that standpoint. The state of Florida now. Florida voted for Trump by 13 points in 2024. The Senate race wasn't too different, 12.8%. Based on those margins, that would also put Florida at likely Republican. See, I'm not even factoring in any of the candidates running here. This is just going off the past election results. It already has Republicans up at 49, Democrats are at 41. Well, now let's look at some states that went for the Democrats, like New Jersey, for instance. New Jersey, Andy Kim, the Democrat, won by 9.6% in 2024. We saw Kamala Harris beat Donald Trump here by only 5.9%. But it is worth noting the last time Cory Booker was on the ticket in 2020, he won by about 16.3%. A lot of Republican registration data has changed, though, in New Jersey. Is it possible New Jersey could be likely Democratic? Well, I'm not predicting it, but in this scenario, sure, let's go down that path. New Jersey goes in the likely Democratic category. Virginia voted for Tim Kaine by 8.9% in 2024. For president, voted for Harris by 5.8%. Two likely Democratic wins, Virginia would go in likely Democratic based on recent election results. Now the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is interesting. The presidential level voted for Kamala Harris by 4.2%, a lean Democratic margin. On the Senate level, it voted for Amy Klobuchar by 15.7%. So one was lean Democratic, one was safe Democratic. Splitting the difference on those would be about a likely Democratic starting point for the Dems in Minnesota. This puts Democrats at 44, Republicans are at 49. And again, it's not going to be a complete apples to apples comparison when we're just doing the election results and not factoring in the candidates, because it's about to get a little bit wonky in a few of these up and coming calls. But it's not as far off in most cases either. A state like Iowa, for instance. Donald Trump just won the state of Iowa in 2024 by about 13.2%. We could look at the Senate race, though, the last one that was up here, a 12-point win for Chuck Grassley. 2020 was a 6.5% win for Joni Ernst. But based on those rankings, we could give Iowa to the Republicans in the likely Republican column. That would get Republicans up to 50 Senate seats. Now we have a state of Ohio. Ohio is fascinating. It just voted for Bernie Moreno by 3.6% against the Democrat Sherrod Brown. That would be lean Republican. Ohio also voted for Donald Trump over Kamala Harris by 11.2%. So this one, you could say, based on those election results, Ohio should start out as likely Republican. But what if Sherrod Brown runs again? Well, then technically it could go down to lean Republican as well. We're going to have to watch and see how that one develops. But that puts the Republicans at 51. So without even getting into any of the seats that could be lean or tilt at this time, Ohio, again, depending, Republicans already break 50 Senate seats. But now things get interesting, because when you look at the state of Maine and its election results in recent years, Maine should be a likely Democratic state. Kamala Harris won it by about 7 points in 2024 at the presidential level. Angus King, the other independent Democratic senator, won with 17.4%. Yet Susan Collins won by 8.6%. This is where things start to get a little weird. I'm just going off the 2024 results here. I'm not saying Susan Collins is going to lose, but based on the election results, it suggests Susan Collins should probably be losing Maine in a likely Democratic, at worst, lean Democratic margin of victory. This is not my official prediction. This is more of a scenario based on the election results, but that's where Maine would start off. The state of New Hampshire, right next door, voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by about 2.8% in 2024. The Senate race 2022 was the last one, about a 9.1% win over Maggie Hassan. The most recent election in 2024 would suggest New Hampshire starts out as lean Democrat. Now the state of Michigan. Michigan is very, very fascinating. It voted for Donald Trump by 1.4%. That voted, or in 2024, the Senate race voted for Elisa Slotkin over Mike Rogers by 0.34%. Super, super close matchup. Those election results alone, a narrow lean win for Trump, a tilt win for the Democrats, suggests Mike Rogers should be the tilt Republican favorite in the state of Michigan. North Carolina now, this is where Tom Tillis really gets saved. Trump won by 3.2% in 2024. The last Senate race was 2022, where Ted Budd won by 3.2%. This would suggest, I keep clicking on the presidential map, I'm sorry, that Tom Tillis should win by lean Republican margin. And now, this is where things get really interesting in the state of Georgia. The presidential race showed Trump winning by 2.2%. The last Senate race showed Raphael Warnock winning by 2.8%. So the two most recent elections in that state show pretty much the exact opposite in terms of how it should go. If you just do the math out, that would give the Democrats a less than 0.5% chance of winning in Georgia. So just going off the Senate map, based on the recent results from 2024 and 2022, and just comparing them very briefly, it starts the Republicans out with 53 Senate seats, Democrats 47. It's the same composition of the U.S. Senate map right now. And it's not too much of a wild map, but it's also a little bit weird to see Maine being likely Democrat, Michigan being tilt Republican, Georgia being tilt Democrat, North Carolina lean Republican. But it's interesting when you factor the candidates out of it and just look at the election results. Aside from Maine, the map really isn't all that different from how it could possibly go. But it's interesting to run through this scenario and see what the election results suggest. Now, obviously, election results alone isn't usually enough to predict how the race is going to go. You have to factor in the quality of the candidates that are in the race. For instance, Tom Tillis is not as strong as a Republican as Ted Budd or Donald Trump is in the state of North Carolina. That being said, Susan Collins is also a much stronger candidate than Donald Trump is in the state of Maine. That would put Maine, in my view, back to the lean Republican column. Michigan and Georgia, Mike Rogers is probably not going to be running as strongly as Donald Trump did in 2024. Even though Rogers won the ballot with him, he also lost the seat when Trump won the state. That alone would probably have Michigan starting out right now as tilt Democrat in my ratings. Georgia, I think John Ossoff would be a little bit stronger in Georgia starting out than a tilt Democratic ranking, but it's really interesting when you start to break things down that this 2026 Senate map, it has some room to move, but it also, based on the recent election results in a lot of these states, it really doesn't. You could factor in Ohio into the lean Republican column, but Florida, I don't think gets competitive. Texas, if Ken Paxton's the nominee, I'm willing to have the conversation, but I still think winning by more than 5 points is probably how that race would go. Alaska and Iowa, I personally doubt are going to be competitive. Same thing really with Minnesota, Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, and New Jersey. I don't see those getting really competitive either. So the election results for the past few elections kind of set up a scenario in a map where 5 Senate seats are really competitive for 2026, and it's not really all that different from how I think things are going to go anyway. But how these 5 Senate seats go, that's the main question going into 2026. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you did, and I hope to see you in future videos.